about the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be true.
And it is not a question of a little occultism or a touch of mysticism, Mr. Denton. It is vampires. It is a host of damned souls of Pelham House.
I am thy father's spirit, doomed for a certain term to walk the night.
Here, the old gods aren't dead.
And what of the true god?
He's dead. Can't complain.
People assume that time is a strict progression of cause to effect, but actually, from a non-linear, non-subjective viewpoint, it's more like a big ball of wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey stuff.
You're listening to Paranormal UK Radio.
Hello, everybody. This is Irene Allen Block, the host of the... What show is this now?
Say it. Say it.
Say it. As the host of the Paranormal UK Radio show, the flagship show of the Paranormal UK Radio Network, and with me tonight again, as as always,
Say it.
is
Say it.
Say it, Mark Johnson.
Hey, you remember.
And I'm trying to take something off at this moment, so it's not very... Right, it's okay. I've done it.
Well, we'll forgive you for this time. You just got over coronavirus after all.
That's it, I have, haven't I?
So you can always blame it on that.
Yes, okay. Right, so Mark, how are you?
Oh, doing fine. Still sequestered here. How about you?
Yeah. Wales is a bit tougher than England. England's loosened up a little bit, but Wales, he's still keeping us under lock and key.
Yeah. Our state just, our governor last week extended us another 30 days, although they're talking about opening up our beaches for Memorial Day. We'll wait and see what that happens with that. But, we're also starting to see a lot of civil disobedience, people saying, screw it, and they're going out anyway, and businesses reopening early, and it's just people are getting tired of being locked down.
Yeah, it's true. It is tiring. I tell you, it is tiring. I've been in this house, locked down since February. Because it was, towards the end of February that I got COVID?
Yeah, and we got it over here about 2 weeks later.
Yeah. So I've been locked up for about God knows how many months. I tell you what, I feel like I've been doing time in jail. I really do. But the weather's been good. We've been able to get out in the garden, so we're better off than most.
Well, that's good. Yeah, we've started having nicer weather here. Was able to get out for a walk this weekend and enjoy some of the nicer weather. So, summer's around the corner.
Yeah. You're talking about beaches. They've opened up some of the beaches in England. And people were respecting their distance, but it's very, very difficult on some of these beaches where you've got to climb down a little narrow path, down a cliff and things like that. And people are coming up and you're going down, so it's very difficult to keep your distance there. But the majority of people have been pretty good, I think, even on the beach, sitting away from each other in their little sections, their little parts. So, but the beautiful beaches here in Wales, absolutely fantastic beaches in Wales, sand for miles and miles and miles. And they're closed, you can't go near them.
Yeah, one day soon we'll be past all of this. I can't wait. I'm tired of it.
I think everyone's tired of it, but it's difficult. You can't really do anything because as soon as you go out of your locality, sort of thing, especially here in Wales, you'll get pulled over by the police. You'll get fined, one thing or another. In England they can drive, they can go to work and things. But here it's a lot different. In Wales, like I said, he's pretty tight. Scotland's beginning to loosen up, and Ireland have. Islands are opened up a hell of a lot of shops and things. You know, they're doing more. But Wales? Yeah.
Wales is, that's like our states over here. Some states like mine are tougher than others. A lot of them are opening up. So I think it's just a matter of time. As long as they reopen things, as long as there's not another big surge, if they can keep things at a reasonable level, then I think we'll see everything open up. Because God knows we need it. There's so many people out of work over here right now.
Yeah, and so many with long hair.
Like me.
Yeah, like you. And my husband. Oh, my God. And he won't let me take the scissors to it, He really won't let me touch it. He'd let a hairdresser touch it. He'd let a stranger touch it, but he won't let me. What's wrong with me putting a pudding basin on his head and cutting round?
Those were popular back in the 30s.
Yeah, they were, weren't they? They were great hairstyles. So,
You know what's really scary? Just on a totally different tangent. I mentioned the 30s. And you know what? We're only 10 years away from the new 30s.
Yeah, and you weren't about in the 30s. Neither was I.
No.
No.
But it's all
You've been
old
watching
films.
too many films, haven't you?
Old bowl haircuts, yeah.
Yeah. And television. Oh, God, it's repeats and repeats going back centuries.
Yeah, because everything got shut down. They're not making anything new because all the productions got shut down. I'm just struggling to find old series and shows or movies to watch to buy time till new things come out.
That's it. Yeah. And what about the cinemas? When the cinemas open up, there'll be no new movies, will there?
There's some movies that were shot last year that they were waiting to release, but it's still, the cinemas are going to take a while. And now what they're doing is they're taking movies that were meant for the theaters and they're releasing them on demand. Or I was reading today, Tom Hanks did this World War II movie. And it was supposed to come out in the theaters on Father's Day, and they just announced it today. Instead, they're scrapping it, and it's going to go out on Apple Plus TV. So it's going to go straight to streaming. And they're doing that with a lot of movies right now because the theaters aren't open. And when they do open, they're afraid nobody's going to go. So a lot of this stuff is coming straight to TV, which may change how movies moving forward.
Yeah.
Yeah. We'll have to wait and see. Well,
yeah, we will.
Well, on a brighter note, we still have podcasting. We still have our show.
We still got our radio shows.
Yep. And with that, might as well get the show going. So
that's it. Okay, so do you want to introduce our guest, Mark?
Yes. Tonight's guest is an author and UFO experiencer. He's the author of a book called Incident at Devil's Den, A True Story, the compelling proof of alien visitation, alleged government involvement, and an alien implant discovered in a routine X-ray. So we want to welcome Terry Lovelace to the program. How are you doing, Terry?
I couldn't be better, thanks. It's nice to hear your voice.
Hello, Terry.
Hi, Irene.
Hi, how's it over there for you?
You know, pretty much the same as for you guys. I mean, I'm in Texas. I'm in Dallas. Dallas is the hardest hit county in the state of Texas. I think we have something like 7,500 cases. And, you know, I'm not leaving the house. I mean, everything's opening up here. But until an epidemiologist tells me it's all clear, you know, I'm staying put. I don't trust the medical opinion of Governor Abbott or President Trump. So I'm going to be cautious.
Yeah, well, you're very right to be. I tell you, because I've had it and it's not nice.
I've heard
both Irene and her husband had it.
Oh,
yeah, we had it. Yeah, the two of us had it. And it took me weeks, absolutely weeks, didn't it, Mark, to get over it?
Yeah, I mean, longer than the 2 weeks. You were up for even 3 to 4 weeks, but even after a month, you just weren't right.
No, funny little things. A lot of little add-on things that seem to come after it.
Not being able to taste food or smell?
No, I couldn't. Oh, neither of us could do that. That was one of the early signs. You know, it's, early signs. We lost taste and smell. We were both talking about this last night. When did we actually lose it? Did we lose it at the beginning? Did we lose it at the end? Or did we lose it in the middle? And it was towards the end we lost taste and smell. But, you know, I slept for 3 days. And he was really worried about it because every time I open my eyes, you turn around and the next thing I'm back, I'm asleep. I'm out, gone. I've literally gone again. Fatigue was terrible.
That's awful.
Oh, well.
So were the two of you then taking care of one another?
Yes. Yeah, they wanted to send me into hospital, but I didn't want to go and my husband didn't want to send me. So
maybe smart.
Yeah.
Yes.
I had a feeling if I went into hospital, I wouldn't come out. But don't take that. That's just the way I was, people. You know, if you need to go into hospital, you go into hospital. Don't listen to me. It was just it was all new at the time. There hadn't been many cases over here, and I was frightened. So, you know, I just didn't want to go into hospital. I don't like hospitals anyway. So.
Yeah, who does? Who does, really? Well, you know what? Again, we can distract ourselves by talking about UFOs and abductions. So,
yes,
you know, Terry's book, Incident Devil's Den. Now, I actually read your book a while ago, Terry, a few months back. So
yes.
I was very familiar with it when we first got in contact. And, you know, just for those people who may not be familiar with you or your book, can you just give us a little bit about your background? And then we can lead into this incident, what happened with you on this trip that caused you to have this experience.
Sure. I'm originally from St. Louis, Missouri. I graduated from high school in 1973, and I enlisted in the United States Air Force and served on active duty from 1973 to 1979. In 1977 is where I had my event. A coworker and I went camping at a place called Devil's Den State Park in northwestern Arkansas, and that's where we had our encounter. After the military, I finished my undergraduate degree. I went to law school at Michigan and made my career in the law, first in private practice and then as a civil servant. I retired as state's attorney from the state of Vermont in January of 2012. And, I've never had mentioned this to a single person, not to a soul, and have really had no intention to ever telling anyone. My wife and I were married at the time. We'd been married 46 years. Mm-hmm. So the two of us knew, but we never cared to get anyone else involved. Besides, that would have been career suicide in the legal field anyway. Yeah, that would not have worked well.
Well, I know a couple of lawyers who have come out with this, like Andrew Bishago and his story. And, I don't know whatever happened with his career after that. I know Mark Anthony, who's the psychic medium. Yeah, he still has his law practice, but mostly these days he focuses on his spiritual work.
Yeah. I can only say that, in private practice that might have worked. I kind of doubt it, but certainly I was an assistant attorney general for most of my public service career, and that just would not have worked. No. I would have been out of work. There's no doubt in my mind. Some professions like academia, air traffic controllers, law enforcement, there's a whole collection of careers where it's kind of just not talked about. And if it is talked about, you're looked at sideways.
Yeah, or you lose your job, especially in the airline industry for so many years. They just don't want to, pilots were afraid of reporting it because if they saw a UFO, they could lose their ability to fly.
Yeah, no one wants to be unemployed.
Nope.
What the catalyst for me to write this book and speak publicly was really from an incident in October 2012 where I took a fall I had a problem with my right leg, and I had it x-rayed. I get all my medical care from the Veterans Administration. So I went to the VA hospital, they x-rayed my leg, and that's when they discovered that I had these odd implants in my leg. And, you know, what really drove that home was I was a runner for most of my adult life. And, you know, I didn't run marathons, but I'd run, 3 to 6 miles a day, depending on the day. But I ran almost every day. And every time I would run, from 1979 to my last long run in 2005, there was a spot directly above my knee and lateral, my right knee and lateral, that would go completely numb right as I would hit the 2-mile mark in my run. I mean, give or take 50 yards. And it was a perfectly round spot about the size of an American $50 or a Canadian toonie. And it was absolutely 100% numb. I mean, I could take a pen and delineate the outline of it. And it would stay that way for about a half an hour and then, gradually fade back. And I asked my doctor about it in 1980, and I said, Doc, when I run, I get this numb spot on my leg. And she was like, it's a histamic reaction of some kind or something. I wouldn't worry about it. Doesn't sound like, does it affect your run? And I answered honestly, no. And she says, well, I wouldn't worry about it. And I didn't worry about it until I saw my x-rays. And then I realized that the thing that was above my knee is directly over that spot that would go numb. And then I made a connection mentally. So I know that this thing had been in my leg since at least 1979. And
wow.
That was a major revelation. That was a game changer. It just
Terry, why was it making it this spot underneath where it was implanted go numb? Was it affecting nerves or something?
Well, no, I've had 2 doctors tell me that it was a histamic reaction to a foreign body.
Oh.
So.
Now, are they still in there, or did you have them removed?
Well, I had a problem with that. And, as soon as I saw them in 2012, the first thing on my mind was, I got to get these things out of me. I want them out of me. So as soon as I could, I made an appointment with a surgeon, with a VA surgeon. And I talked to him, and he was really intrigued by the x-rays, and he was eager to take them out. And we made an arrangement whereby that I wanted a third-party objective observer in the operating room, and I wanted a chain of custody, just like a forensic chain of custody if they were removing a bullet, say, from a injured person, where it would go directly from my body to the surgeon's hands to that third party who would accept it. And I would have an established chain of custody, so no one could say, well, it was switched, or this isn't the one. And we had that all worked out. And the last thing he said was, I need a cardiac clearance letter, because in your health history, I see you had a heart attack in 2005. And I also had a stent put in 2011. So I thought, okay, that shouldn't be a big deal. Well, it was a big deal. And I went to 2 cardiologists within the VA system, and both of them told me no. No, they said they both had the same answer. They said, look, there are 500,000 veterans walking around out there with shrapnel in their bodies. And unless it's causing them a problem, we won't remove it, because the risk of surgery is greater than the benefit. It's a risk versus benefit analysis. And because I had a history of coronary artery disease and a heart attack and then another heart attack in 2011, I couldn't get a cardiac clearance letter. And without it, surgeons would not touch me.
So it's going to stay in you for however long you live then?
Well, the things below my knee that look like a collection of Tic Tacs arranged in a floral pattern, those items are still there, undisturbed. The thing above my knee, I woke up on November 17th, 2017, and I had the most horrendous pain in my legs. And I had puncture wounds on both of my legs. And then about 24 to 36 hours later, there was this odd bruise pattern that emerged, kind of in almost like a flower shape around the puncture marks.
Oh.
And I told my wife, I said, I think that E.T. came and retrieved its merchandise. I think they came and took this thing out of my leg. And she said, well, you need to get an x-ray. And I'm like, well, yeah, I'm going to. So you can't just walk into a freestanding radiology clinic and say, I need an x-ray. They want a doctor's request. Mm-hmm. So I called my doctor and I said, Doc, I think E.T. came and took these things out of my leg. Will you give me No. They wouldn't do that. They wasn't having any part of that. So what I did was I took photocopies of the x-ray on paper. I took them with me and I went to see a chiropractor, doctor of chiropractic, because I knew that those guys look at 100 x-rays a week.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I waited. I didn't have an appointment. I waited around about 40 minutes. And finally, this doctor calls me back and says, gets me back on a table and says, okay, show me where you hurt. And I said, well, right here on my legs, I got these puncture wounds. And he looks kind of puzzled. And he's asking me, were you in a car accident? What happened to you? And he looked at the wounds on my leg. And I said, well, no, what happened was, you see, I had this implant in my leg that I think was put in by aliens in 1979. And I think last night they came and took it out. And I'm not kidding. He had me by my left elbow and is escorting me to the front door.
Oh, jeez.
And I held the photograph of the x-ray up in front of his face. And he finally, after 2 or 3 steps, stopped in his tracks and said, come back with me. And we went back into his office. He took me into his office. He shut the door, and his phone's ringing, and people are knocking at the door. And he says, lays the 2 pictures of the x-rays out on his desk, and he says, tell me about these. And I gave him the capsule version, and I said, this happened in 1977, at least, I believe. And I think they came and took him out last night. And you know what? This guy was amazingly empathetic. I had no doubt he's either seen this before or is an experiencer himself. He said, I'll tell you where to go for the x-ray. I'll pay for your x-ray. But all I ask that you do, because I told him I was in the middle of writing a book, and he said, please don't use my name or the name of my clinic. And I promised him I wouldn't, and I kept that promise. So I went and I got an x-ray, and I held it up to the light in the car to the window, and sure enough, the thing above my leg was gone. And then, I felt relieved, but kind of disappointed too. So he asked me to drop the x-rays off at his clinic, which I did. And he called me the next evening and says, well, did you see your x-rays? And I said, yeah, I guess the thing's gone, huh? And he says, yeah, but they left something in you. Oh. And I'm like, well, what? And he says, well, you got to know where to look. It's right in the middle of your femur. There are 2 tiny wires that run parallel with your femur that should not be there. The wire is a different size than the wires on the original object. So, and I'm positive.
What they've done is they must have known that you were going to try and take it out. So they've come and took it out before you've got the chance to get it out, or anybody's going to accept it and allow it to come out. And they've updated it with a newer model.
That's absolutely correct. I was at that time. In October, November of 2017, I was talking to a surgeon in Tijuana who didn't care about a cardiac clearance letter. He'd operate on anybody, So I was seriously considering having that done in December. And there's a photo of it. And I think they knew that. So the doctor said the chiropractor. I have the original X-rays here in my drawer. And the chiropractor said, I asked him, I said, how can these entities be so inept as to leave these wires in my body? And he kind of chuckles and says, no, they're not inept. He said, they don't make mistakes. He said, what they did is they took out their 1977 model and gave you a 2017 upgrade.
Like you went from Windows 95 to Windows 10.
That's what I think.
One go,
I believe, yeah.
Amazing.
I met Steve Colburn, who is famous for finding implants in people. And he tests for radiation and a variety of things. And he tested me when I was at UFOCon in San Francisco in February of this year. And he says, I don't find that you've had any recent contact. I don't know how I made that conclusion, but he also said that the objects below my knee are magnetic. And he showed me they registered magnetism on a meter. So those items are still there. And like I say, the 2 wires are now there. I've talked to someone about maybe having the wires removed through what's called a needle biopsy.
Yeah.
Because they're so tiny, they could maybe go in and retrieve them. So, I may be able to have that done. I'm working on that.
Mm-hmm.
So, did you ever get any indication of what the implant was for? I mean, we've talked to a lot of experiencers. Sometimes they think they're tracking devices. Other people, like Whitley Strieber, he told us that he had his implant for almost 20 years before it activated in some way, and now it's allowing him access to a lot of different information which he's using in his books. So, I mean, what do you think, or did you ever get any idea what this implant was doing in you?
No. I mean, I can speculate. I talked to Whitley at length about this, and he's a very psychic, very gifted medium or something. He has connections. He can talk to the other side. I don't have that ability, so I really don't know who to ask. I don't know. I honestly do not know. But my guess would be, tracking, and it's probably so sophisticated that it monitors all of my activity. That right down to minutia. But again, that's just a guess. The feeling of finding something like this inside of you, it makes you feel like an animal in the Serengeti plain. I mean, it does. You're tagged. You're tagged for life. They know what you're doing. They know where you're at. They probably know what you're thinking and saying and talking about. So
it also could be advanced machine of monitoring vitals too. What's going on with the health in your body.
Yes.
That's a possibility. Now, obviously, with the title of your book, Incident at Devil's Den, and we're going to talk about that experience in a moment, it's obvious that you're still, after all these years, having some form of contact. Now, do you have any memories of anything happening, or is it just like I said, you're finding things on X-rays or finding bruises on your legs, but having no memory of anything happening?
No, I have a lot of memories. I have memories from childhood. In my book, I talk about I was in my backyard, and this was 1963. I was 8 years old at the time. And I was in my backyard in St. Louis, Missouri, in an urban area, a set of row houses. It was a beautiful May day, and not a cloud in the sky. And the whole neighborhood was active. Everybody was outside. Women were hanging up laundry and talking, and there were kids and dogs and cats and cars and everything, and it was loud. And I was playing with this bow and arrow, and I was shooting these arrows into a bale of hay. Now, I don't know why my parents would give me an adult bow and arrow set, give me something so lethal at age 8 to play with, but, I certainly wouldn't give it to my kids, but that's what I was doing. And as I'm looking down, I'm loading an arrow into the notch of my bowstring. And as I do, I see this perfectly round circle move across my feet. And I looked up, and I saw this beautiful silver flying saucer. And I mean, and there was a curious auditory change. I mean, it was like I had put my hands over my ears and pressed. The sounds became muted and muffled. And I was just awestruck by this thing. I thought it was beautiful. I mean, the word sexy wasn't part of my vocabulary, 1963, but I think I may have called it bitchin' or something. I don't know. I don't remember. But I just thought it was I thought it was so cool in the same way like a new Aston Martin on a showroom floor is, or a new Corvette. It was just like a work of art, I thought.
No, I could find that sexy.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And I watched it, and it wobbled a little bit in the breeze above me. And I was just awestruck. I mean, I tried to take every inch of it in, and my mind is racing. I'm only 8, but I mean, I put together, models as a kid. I kind of knew a little about flying things. I knew there had to be a propulsion system. I didn't see an exhaust. I didn't see any rivets. It was just one solid piece of highly polished aluminum or something. Was it very big? I'm guessing. I'm not a good judge of, but I can say it was probably 50 feet over my head, and maybe a little more than 30 feet in diameter.
Were you the only one who witnessed it?
I was, although I don't understand how that can possibly be. I mean,
maybe you were the only one that was meant to see it.
That's because I don't understand that to this day. And I dropped my bow and arrow, and I watched it until it kind of did a list to starboard kind of thing, tilted to clear the power lines, and it shot off. It shot off like from 0 to 500 miles an hour in a blink of an eye, and was just gone. And I screamed, "Mom!" And my poor mother comes running out. She thinks I probably shot a neighbor in the head with an arrow or something, And she comes out and she's checking me for blood, and I won't take my eyes off the last spot I saw in the sky. I mean, my eyes are glued to that spot where it disappeared in the sky. And I'm like, "Mom, did you see it? Did you see it? It was so cool. It was a flying saucer." And she's like, stop saying that. You will not say that. Stop that. And she dragged me inside the house and sat me down and said, "Now, son, I don't know what you saw, Terry, but I guarantee you did not see a flying saucer. What you saw was probably a jet. You understand?" And I'm like, "No." And, I had a good reputation. I wasn't the kid that I was a pretty straight kid.
Yeah.
And she says, "Well, draw me a picture of what you saw." I'm like, "Sure, no problem." She gave me a pencil and a piece of paper, and I drew a circle and handed it back to her. And she was like, "Oh." And then she said something curious, and I think this is a reflection of the times of the 1963. She says, "Terry, you can't tell people that you saw a flying saucer because they'll think there's something wrong with you. They'll think there's something wrong with us." And I'm like, "Oh, now I get it. Yeah." So
that's fear of stigma.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like what we were talking about earlier, how law enforcement and pilots and whatnot won't say anything for the exact same reason, being ostracized, losing jobs, or being looked at sideways, and so people are afraid and they keep this stuff in. I mean, really, it's been within the last few years that ufology has really, along with the paranormal too, in general, everything is kind of more exploded into the public consciousness with all the different television shows and documentaries and whatnot. It's a lot more accepted now than it was even 20 years ago.
Couldn't agree with you more. I have no doubt, had I published this book, I published it March 10th of 2018. Had I published it 5 years earlier, I don't think it would have been nearly as popular. Yeah, times are changing. I couldn't agree with you more.
Well, I mean, and again, we mentioned Whitley Strieber before. Whitley, he published Communion, which the book itself was a huge bestseller, but then when the media got a hold of it, they made him a laughingstock and made fun of him and whatnot, and his publishing career went straight down the tubes. He couldn't get anything published. He had to start self-publishing, and he really struggled there for a long time because nobody wanted anything really to do with him. Even though he was putting out, not only all the nonfiction books, but he was still writing novels and getting novels out there. But he, this is a man who wrote several books before Communion that they turned into feature films, like the Wolfen, The Hunger, and yet after Communion, it's nobody wanted to touch him. And I know he and his wife Ann had a lot of lean years for a long time after that.
Yeah. I was with Whitley at the conference in Pine Ridge in South Dakota last June. And we had some amazing discussions. He was talking about, he wrote a book that he claims to have co-authored with Annie.
Yes, the Afterlife Connection. We had him on to talk about that. In fact, we had some very strange things happen while we were interviewing him, and he kind of came through while we were doing our interview. It was pretty interesting.
Well, I'll tell you, he's got a new book out called A New World.
Yeah, we just talked to him about it last month.
And he talks about his experiences at Pine Ridge. And this is where we were at. We were at Pine Ridge in South Dakota. And he had told us about the white moth, that Annie will appear to him in the form of a white moth. And he was kind of teared up about it, but told us the story. And we were outside on the deck, and we went back inside. And when we did, he unzipped his leather jacket, and a white moth flew out.
Wow.
And we were all just stunned. And he just waved and said, "Hi, Annie." Strange. It was just incredible.
That's fascinating stuff. Let's go back and let's talk about, you were talking about you had experiences in childhood. And then what events led up to the main story of your camping trip in Devil's Den?
Sure. At age 11 in 1966, I had a brief encounter where in the middle of the night, I saw some flashing lights outside my second-story bedroom window. And I got up to look, and I'm thinking, what is this, a fire engine outside or something? And bitterly cold January evening. And I got up and I looked, I pulled the curtain back, and there was a flying disc right outside my second-story window with this like steam or fog, heavy fog underneath of it. And the lights were emanating from a dome on the tower in the center. And I'm just, again, awestruck, and I'm satisfied. I'm thinking, well, now I get to see the top of this thing. I didn't get to see the top last time. And I tucked the curtain into the Venetian blind so I could have a hands-free look at this thing. And I look at it for a while, and suddenly I just felt satisfied, and I went back to bed. And immediately went to sleep. And I got up the next morning, and when I did, I didn't remember it at first. And I looked over and I saw the curtain tucked into the blinds, and then it all came flooding back. And I never told a soul. I mean, after 1963, I knew better. But I felt kind of almost smug. I mean, most people go through a lifetime, spend a lifetime, and never see a single thing. And here I am at age 11, and I've seen them twice. So, there was a long spell after that, normal adolescence, no sightings, no anything. Went in the Air Force in 73, and I was a medic and an EMT. And a friend of mine, I refer to in the book as Toby and I drove an ambulance, and we worked the night shift at Whiteman Air Force Base emergency room. And we were first responders. If there was a car wreck, a heart attack, a plane crash or something, we were the first ones to respond. And in 1975, 2 years before Devil's Den, in 1975, we got a call one night, and we were dispatched to a missile launch control facility. Whiteman at the time was a SAC base. Now, SAC, with the Strategic Air Command, no longer exists. That base, Whiteman Air Force Base, is still there, and it houses now the B-2 bombers. But when I was there, it had B-52s loaded with nuclear weapons, and it had a squadron of Minutemen II ICBMs scattered all over hundreds of acres of farm field in these launch control facilities, spread out obviously so that they could survive anything except a direct hit. And we got a call. We were dispatched, had an emergency call from a launch control facility I referred to in the book as Kilo 5, and it was about 18 miles, 15 miles, somewhere around that range from the base. And we drove our ambulance out there. We had information that a technician had been injured. And we got there, and make a long story short, a missile technician working on this ICBM fell inside this missile silo and broke his ankle, or severely messed it up. And while we were there, we were stopped by a captain who was standing in the middle of the road, and there were just all these security police guys around, and everybody is staring up at something. And he orders us to pull the ambulance over and park, which I did. And he ordered us to stay in the vehicle, stay in your ambulance, and stay off the radio. So my buddy Toby, not being one to obey orders, hops out and puts on a parka, hops out, and he's gone. And I can't see anything because the inside the windows are frosting up. And he comes back a minute or two later. He opens my door on the driver's side, grabs me, and pulls me out of the ambulance, saying, "Man, you have got to see this." And I grab my parka and I walk outside, slide the parka on, and I'm trying to figure out what everybody's looking at. And above, there's a blue dome above the missile silo. And this thing is 50 feet over the silo. And it looks like it's about the size of a full-size van. It's not a saucer. It's not a triangle. It looks a lot like the thing from Rendlesham. I refer to it in the book as a black diamond because it had many facets on it. And, you know, it's crazy when you see something like that suspended in midair. My first thought was to look for, like, wires or something, you know, but there's no wires. There's no markings on the thing. There's no helicopter blades. It's just sitting there dead still in midair. And the captain said, you know, I thought he was going to be, you know, furious with us for getting out of the ambulance, and he wasn't. And we're standing near him, and we're watching this thing, and after a few minutes, it just took off. It just shot off, and it was gone. And, you know, he smiles and turns around, looks at me like as if to say, "Did you see what I saw?" You know? And it took a minute or two for everybody to snap back into their respective roles. And when it was gone, he said, "Okay, you guys can go in and pick up your man," and we did. And so that was from H11.
Sorry, Terry, were you all told to keep quiet about it?
Yeah, it was an interesting thing. I wrote up our report. Yeah. And I got back to base, and it was early in the morning. But the squadron commander, the hospital commander, was already there, and he was a good guy. I mean, he was really a decent man. And he took us into his office, and he asked to see my report, and he took it over to a copy machine, and he made a couple copies. He took a copy with my signature on it, and all he did was he took a black felt marker and redacted or marked out all of the times, the time that we left the hospital, the time that we arrived on scene, the time that we loaded our patient, all of those relevant times he X'd out.
Yeah. And
he says, "This is the report that you file." And then he said to us with a straight face, he says, "Okay, boys, what you saw out there, that was a prototype helicopter. Do you understand?" And we said, "Yes, sir." And he says, "Now, because it's a secret, you know, there's no talking about it. Understand?" He says, "I know you're smart guys. You're not going to talk about this. But you know, nobody needs to know." And that was it. You know, we weren't asked to sign an NDA. We weren't interviewed by security police. And that was it. And we were kind of confused as to, you know, was it really a prototype helicopter? Or, you know, was it USAF made, or maybe CCCP, something the Soviets made? You know, we were kind of torn. We really didn't know. You know, I thought I was a consummate expert on extraterrestrial aircraft because I'd seen two, and they were both saucers. This wasn't a saucer, ergo it must not be from outer space. So, yeah.
Have you ever spoken to anybody since then that has seen something similar? But describe something similar to that.
I spoke to many security policemen. Because we kind of had usually if there was an incident to respond to, the security police were first responders too. So we were always kind of at the same place. We're, plane wreck or a car accident, whatever it might be. The security police were usually there too. So we knew a lot of these guys.
Yeah.
And they told us a story, which was verified by Robert Hastings in his investigations. I talked to Robert quite a bit. And these security policemen, now I never saw this, okay? This is hearsay. But we were told that there was an orange ring or an orange disc that would manifest over the. They had a munitions bunker where they kept the atomic weapons for the B-52s.
Yeah.
And this thing, one of these orange glowing discs or rings, would appear above the bunker and kind of zip around a little bit, and then shine a laser into the bunker, just on top of the dome.
Yeah.
And then things would shoot off. And supposedly that happened, many, many times. Again, I've never seen it, but I sure heard it from more than a single source. So I think that's probably true.
More than likely is, if more than one of them was saying it and they were describing the same thing. So
that was 75. Then the event that we had while camping was in 1977.
When you say Devil's Den, I keep thinking of Devil's Dyke. We got Devil's Dyke over here near Brighton in Sussex. And it's the cliff tops, and the White Cliffs.
Yes.
Yeah. Not the White Cliffs of Dover, but it's all along that line. So it's all white cliffs, chalk cliffs. And it's called Devil's Dyke, and there's a lot of suicides there. And every time I saw Devil's Den, the first thing that came into my head was Devil's Dyke. So,
well, when I started writing this book, I had thought about this over the years. How does some place or something get the name Devil attached to it?
Well, I will say there's another famous Devil's Den, and that is a section of the Gettysburg battlefield in Pennsylvania. There's one section near the southern end of the battlefield called Devil's Den, which is very popular, especially with us ghost hunters when we've gone out there. And it got its name, just like a lot of the locations in Gettysburg have some names associated with, blood or devil or whatnot because of the battle. So that I can understand. But yes, you're right. Why did this park that you went to go camping have the name Devil's Den?
Well, I did a little research, if I could share with you real quick.
Yeah.
There was, I found in my research a 1946 article from the Pittsburgh Press about a family named Van Alst, 2 words, V-A-N, capital A-L-S-T, Van Alst. And they were a family of 5, mom, dad, Catherine, who was age 8, and her 2 younger brothers. And they were driving from Pittsburgh to El Paso, Texas to visit relatives. And they decided to spend the evening camping at Devil's Den in the campgrounds. So they did. And the following morning, they woke up, and the mother is putting breakfast on the picnic table, and the kids are chasing each other around the camper, as kids will do. And the 2 boys ran around, and then there's no Catherine. And the mother frowns. I'd say, yes, this boys, where's your sister? And they were like, well, she was right here. And she's like, go find your sister. So they run, they check the bathrooms, they check, they look around, they can't find her. So I come back and I say, we can't find Catherine. So, the old man gets up, and they start looking for her, and other campers get involved. And 4 hours later, no Catherine, and it's noon. And now the park rangers get involved. And the long and the short of it is Catherine, who was dressed only in a bathing suit, a one-piece bathing suit, and flip-flops, just slippers, disappeared and was gone for 7 days and 6 nights. On the 7th day, they had They had thousands of people, volunteers, to help. There was a busload of kids from the Arkansas State University there to help look, because on the 7th day, at the end of that day, it was going to transition from a rescue to a recovery mission. So this gentleman that the Pittsburgh Press refers to as Chadwick was up on an elevation of about 700 feet from the campsite. And to get there, you would have had to take a rocky zigzag trail and end up walking about 8 miles. But it was an area that had already been searched twice. He's on top of this thing and he's yelling, "Catherine!" And sure enough, from underneath this limestone overhang steps this little girl, and she just said, "Here I am." And she had a couple bug bites on her, but curiously, she was 100% well hydrated, hadn't lost an ounce of weight. The mother said her hair was even clean. And they carried her back to the website, and of course she sits down and the park rangers want to know what happened to you, who took you, what they do to you. And she says, "I don't know. I don't remember. All I remember is I was chasing, Paul and her other brother. We were playing chase around the camper. That's all the last thing I remember." And the interesting thing is, if you can find it on a Google search, if you pull up the Pittsburgh Press article from 1946, the mother is quoted in that article as stating that her daughter was in fine health and was, and I quote, "eerily calm." And it just seems like an odd quote to me, eerily calm. So that's
well, you think,
crazy.
Again, a child missing for a week, not seeing family, mother, you'd probably think would be a little bit more upset and hysterical. And she just walks out, "Hi, here I am." So I can understand the eerily calm aspect that, she didn't act like
being somewhere.
But she doesn't
remember. Obviously being somewhere, because otherwise she would have been dirty and everything, her feet and,
Plus not having any memory of it.
And it doesn't make sense. And how she got up there. I don't think she was capable. David Paulides, in his fourth book is called Missing 411, The Devil is in the Details. And he talks about all these places with the name devil in them and how they tend to be clusters for these strange abductions. And Devil's Den is listed. As a matter of fact, when I was writing Devil's Den, in August of 2017, there was a 32-year-old young man from Bartlesville, Oklahoma, named Rodney Letterman, who was walking on the Butterfield Trail that cuts through the park. It's an old stagecoach route that they've made into a trail for walking. And he and his friend were walking along the trail about 2 miles into it or less. And Rodney, who had some type of medical condition, asked his friend, he said, "I forgot my inhaler. Would you run back to the truck and grab my inhaler?" And a friend says, "Sure, no worries." So his friend runs back to their truck, grabs the kids, Rodney Letterman's, grabs his inhaler, and runs back. When he gets back, here's Rodney's phone laying on the ground, his cell phone, but there's no Rodney Letterman. So he starts looking around for his friend, and he can't find him. So he gets a hold of the park rangers, and they initiate a search. And they initiated one of the biggest searches, according to the Russellville Police Department and the Park Service, a search involving thousands of people, including helicopters with FLIR, forward-looking infrared radar, bloodhounds from the Russellville Police Department, whose cane got a scent off the cell phone and sat down. And at the time that I put the book on Amazon in March of 2018, there was no trace of Rodney Letterman. That is, until 2019. In March of 2019, two people, a couple, walking along the Butterfield Trail near where Rodney went missing, saw on a log just off the trail in plain view a bone on top of this log. And this is a place obvious, open, visible to everyone. And they walked over and they picked it up, and it was the top of Rodney's skull.
Oh.
verified by DNA through the Bartlesville, Oklahoma Medical Examiner's Office. So just strange. I contacted, my son went to Michigan State University, and I knew someone from the anthropology department up there, and I called him and I said, hey, look, I'd like to know, do you know anything about the Ozark Mountain area, specifically near Devil's Den State Park and the Ozark National Forest? And he says, well, I don't know anything about it, but I know someone who does. And he put me in touch with someone. And I talked to an archaeologist who told me that they have found relics, Native American relics, going back to Paleolithic age, thousands of years old, and campsites all around Devil's Den, but nothing inside Devil's Den. I thought that was strange. He thought that was strange. And I contacted, there are 2 Native American tribes that lay claim to that area. The Caddo tribe, or Caddo, depends on how it could be pronounced either way, I think, and the Kahuna tribe. Both of them lay claim to that territory. And I tracked down a medicine woman from Russellville, and I spoke with her by phone. And I asked her, I said, what can you tell me about Devil's Den? And she says, I can tell you this, that our tribe, our people don't go there. It's considered cursed ground. And I said, well, can you explain why? And she says, no, it's oral tradition. It's a place that we'll transit through. We'll walk there if it's in between point A and point B, but we won't camp there, we don't hunt there, and we don't fish there. And I thought that was really curious. So, the place has a dark and a spooky past. It really does. I mean, had I known that in 1977, we wouldn't have gone.
What made you go there in 1977 to camp? What was your reason? Was it just because it was the place to camp, or was there a reason for it?
Yeah, for the story to make sense, I need to tell that. That's I was an amateur photographer. I had a little darkroom set up inside my house, and I had a brand new camera. And my coworker, Toby, and I, we both lived in NCO housing on the base. And unfortunately, when you live on a nuclear base, there's not a heck of a lot you can do with a camera. So I wanted to get somewhere where I could photograph wildlife. Yeah. And my friend Toby was an amateur astronomer who just lived to watch the night sky. He knew all the constellations. He could tell you when a satellite would come over. He was just really interested in it. And it was his idea. He said, I found the perfect place for us. He says, listen, you can take pictures of wildlife and I can look at the stars and it'd be great. He said, there's no light pollution. He says, we'll just dodge the campgrounds. Because, you don't want people on either side of you, children and other undesirables running around. We want to be on a piece of high ground by ourselves. So I was against the idea at first, but the more I thought about it, the more I thought, yeah, you know what, this could be kind of cool. This might be a lot of fun. So we went. And, our wives, Toby was married at the time, too, and our wives packed us. I was 22, he was 23. Our wives packed a cooler, and the day rolled around, and we drove south. And about a 6.5-hour drive, and we were just elated. I mean, looking back at it, it just all seemed kind of farcical. It just doesn't make a lot of sense. There were a dozen state parks within 45 minutes of where we lived, and we chose to drive 6.5 hours. So we got down there. We bypassed the ranger station because we weren't going to buy a camping permit. And we took
key.
Yeah, I'm not going to waste $1.50, And well, no, we wanted to be by ourselves. That was the whole thing. We didn't want to stay in a campground. So, we took this paved road that turned into gravel that originally turned into just 2 ruts in the road, and we came across a chain. There were a post on either side of the road, and a chain was strung across. And there was a sign that was pretty sternly worded that said, no trespassing, keep out, do not enter, etc. And I stopped the car, and I said, it looks like we got to go back and find another way. And my friend says, no, wait a minute. And he hops out of the car, walks over to this post. And what they had done was they just looped the chain around itself and padlocked it and draped it over this post. So he gets out and he picks it up and drops it and lets it fall to the ground. And that was our mistake. We didn't put it back up, but I'll get to that. And we drove in, and we could see in the distance this elevated space, this piece of high ground, just what we were looking for. And we headed for it, and we drove up, a pretty steep incline and crested the hill, and we were just awestruck. There was this meadow, I called it a meadow, of late blooming wildflowers and grass, a little less than knee high, but it was gorgeous. And we had a beautiful view of the park all around us, the tops of the trees. It was just incredible. And that spot is still there today. Someone found it for me on Google Earth and asked, "Is this where you stayed?" And it absolutely was where we stayed. I didn't even bother to check Google Earth because I thought, that place should be overgrown with 40-year-old mature trees by now.
Yeah.
But it's not. It's clear cut. I published a photograph of it. I don't know if I sent one to you guys or not, but I published it.
It's still a wild meadow, is it?
It's still a meadow. I described it in the book as being horseshoe shaped, but when you look at it from the satellite perspective, it's more triangular shaped.
Yeah.
So, and it's just odd. It's just odd that it's still there, and it's odd that the Bureau of Land Management would pay for the gas for 40 years to cut the grass on top of this place. That makes no sense. But that's where we went, and it was a beautiful place to set up camp. And we set up our camp right on a tree line, just kind of off, where we had the trees to our back. And, we did all the fun stuff. We made a campfire, we barbecued hot dogs, and, ate a meal.
Done
did
all the
boys stuff.
All the boys stuff.
Yeah, it was fun. We took a little hike during the day. It was just nice. And we had these air mattresses with blankets we borrowed from the hospital. We were going to take them back. And, we're sitting. Just laying on these air mattresses around the fire, right? And I remember saying to Toby, I said, man, I can see why people like this. This really is pretty pleasant. And he gloats and says, "Oh, yeah, man, I told you, this is really, really nice." And we had a little talk. We were talking and chat, just having a good time. And there was a lull in our conversation. And it was during that lull in the conversation that I noticed, and this sounds cliche, it really does, but I swear to God, it's absolutely true. 15 minutes earlier, the crickets and the tree frogs in the area were making so much noise, we could hardly talk to one another. And suddenly, it's dead still. I mean, it's not only quiet, it's still. We had a nice breeze blowing from the south, and that had stopped. And it was just eerily calm. I mean, had I been there by myself, I'd have been in my car and out of there. But, I'm with Toby, and I asked him, I said, "Hey, man, is this normal?" Like he would know. He'd never been camping in his life either. And, and he says, "Yeah, look, we've been laughing and cutting up. The crickets, the tree frogs, they'll all be back. Just give it some time. They'll be back." But it did. It unnerved me. And while we're laying there, we're kind of having a little bit more conversation, and he's looking at something to his left. And he asked me, he says, "Hey, Terry, were those lights there before?" And I'm like, "What lights? What are you talking about, man?" And I kind of leaned back so I could see over his shoulders, and on the horizon, there was this tight little triangle of 3 very bright stars. And they were too far above the horizon to have been lights from a train or a parking lot or something. And they were absolutely static. They were still. And I said, "I don't know what those are, man." And he says, "Let's watch them, because it could be," because we knew that if a plane were headed straight at us from a distance, it would look stationary for a while. So we watched it, and it never seemed to move. And then while we're watching it and debating, what the heck is this thing? It turns. And what it did was it rotated like it was on an axis so that the apex of the triangle was pointed up toward the sky and the base was parallel with the ground below it. Yeah. But again, it's pretty much off the horizon. It's not sitting on the ground. And that kind of got us excited, and we're watching this thing, and then it moves up into the air and starts an ascent. And about halfway up in the air, we noticed that because it really was a crystal clear night. There were just 1 trillion stars out, and the background of the sky was bluish rather than black.
Yeah.
And we could see that the inside of this thing, between the 3 points of light inside the triangle, was jet black. And of course, as it moved across star fields, it would block out stars until it had glided past, and then they'd wink back on. So we knew it was somewhere in this atmosphere. And it seemed to reach a ceiling. I don't know how high, but pretty high, and then starts to descend. And it was coming in our direction. It was obviously coming in our direction. And this was about the time it reached the ceiling. I felt this feeling of calm wash over me. And the best way I can describe it is that all of that anxiety, that unsettled feeling, that was all gone. And I felt almost disinterested. I wouldn't say I was apathetic, but I felt, more like an observer than a participant in this thing. And we're just watching this. And I still have that feeling of calm, almost sedation. Mm-hmm. And we saw the thing move across the floor of the forest, or the tops of the forest. We could see the shadow. We could see the reflections of the 3 points of light. And it ended up stopping at about 3,000 feet over our campsite. Well, over the meadow anyway, because our campsite was offset next to the tree line.
Yeah.
And this thing was absolutely enormous. And I describe it as it was as big as a medical building or a super Walmart. It was absolutely enormous.
So it was like a mothership.
Had to be. Yeah. And I do not understand how something so big could not have been seen in 5 different counties. We were pretty far. We were in a remote area. We were far away from the campsite, but it should have been seen. It should have been seen by somebody, surely.
Yeah. Sometimes I think they have a way of blotting themselves out to other viewers. So if they wanted just you to see it, only you'd see it. So it's some technology they must have.
Yeah, I also think that you're talking about that feeling, that peaceful calm, which I think is I've heard of other experiencers who talk about how they feel certain emotions, whether it is intense fear beyond what they think they would normally fear, to calmness, to whatever. I think a lot of this is artificially induced. They also get people to they can focus on one person and get everybody else around them to either look away, ignore, not want to look up there for whatever reason. Yeah. I mean, they could do a lot of psychic manipulation.
Absolutely. There's no question that's what they did to us. And you know what else is common? In the back of my book, I put an email address in the epilogue, and I said, if you've had an experience, write me, tell me about it. And I promise I'll answer everybody, and I do. But I've had so many emails from people that were part of a sighting with 2 or more people, maybe a family or a couple people camping. They have an experience like this, and then afterwards, no one talks about it. And it's just strange because I've got scores of letters like that from people that, this happened, but, for some reason we never discussed it. And
yeah, it's weird, isn't it?
It is, but I think you're spot on. They do. They can control our emotions in some way.
So there they are. They're above you about 30,000 feet.
Yes, actually, it's about 3,000. It's only about 3,000.
Sorry, that I thought I was up in an aeroplane at the time.
Yes,
they fly at 30,000 feet.
Yeah.
Irene, you're always flying at 30,000 feet.
Yeah. 3,000 feet. Okay.
3,000 feet, and then we're both laying on these air mattresses, and we're both in this semi-sedated state. And it was curious because we both felt sleepy. And, we had worked the night shift, 11 p.m. till 8 in the morning for years. So, this was mid-afternoon for us. We shouldn't have been sleepy, but we were. And from the bottom of this thing, there came a light, and it was a visible beam of light. And when I say a visible beam of light, I mean like a column of light. Like if you've ever seen a searchlight, a high-power searchlight cut through fog, you can see a visible column of light.
Yeah.
That's what this was. Only it was about 6 inches in diameter. And it was circular, and it was a column of white light. And it came on, boom, like someone had just hit a switch, and it was on. And it landed right square in the middle of our campfire. And Toby and I just looked at it. And it stayed there for about a minute. And then as fast as it came, someone hit the switch again, and it clicked off. And then immediately, in its stead, there came this laser light. Now, 1977, lasers were a fairly new concept. I mean, I'd seen them on television, but this was the first time I'd ever seen one in real life. And this laser beam, kind of a bluish purple, weird color, about the diameter of a pencil, would land at a spot in our campsite, an arbitrary spot, stay there for 1/10 of a second, and then reappear in a different spot. And it would do that like 10 times a second. So it gave this illusion that this purplish laser beam was dancing all around the campsite. And I remember thinking, hey, this thing's checking us out. I mean, it's scanning us. And it hit me in the chest twice, and I didn't feel a thing. I know that it hit my car, it hit our tent, it hit Toby. And that lasted for probably 3 minutes. It felt like longer, but I think 3 minutes is probably pretty close. And then that light shuts off. And then the two of us are sitting there in silence. There's no noise. And Toby startles me. He speaks up and he says, "Show's over." And he grabs his air mattress and he walks over to our little tent, a little Kmart $10 tent that we bought. And he throws his air mattress inside and falls on top of it. And all I want to do is go to sleep. That's all. Just let me go to sleep, please. And I dragged my air mattress over. I threw it inside the tent. I didn't bother to untie my boots, which comes into play later, or undress in any way. But I threw my air mattress in, and I just fell on top of it. And the last thing I remember thinking was, Toby, you were wrong, man, because those crickets and tree frogs never did come back. But you know what? I still had no anxiety. All I wanted to do was go to sleep, and I did. I was out, and the best we can determine, I was out probably 4.5 hours. We were out probably 4.5 hours, and both of our watches. We had wind-up watches back in the day. We both wore watches because as EMTs, we needed them in our job, and both of our watches had stopped right at 2:40. Give or take a minute, they both stopped at 2:40. Watches never worked again. And
never? That never worked?
Never worked. Never worked again.
Really?
And I had a less than a year old nice Elgin watch my wife had given me for my birthday.
Well, and I wish she was pleased.
Well, you know what? I wish I'd saved that watch because I'd like to know the mechanism that caused it to malfunction.
Yeah, because it's not battery operated like most watches are today. It was probably a wind-up watch.
Absolutely. I mean, it was second nature. I wound it every morning when I got up and put it on my wrist. And it was accurate. It wasn't a cheap watch. It was a good watch for the day.
And Toby's never worked again either?
Toby's never worked either. And I woke up finally with these lights flashing through the tent. at odd intervals. There was white, yellow, greenish lights that were as bright as, remember in the 60s, maybe not, but maybe you don't, but there used to be these flash bulbs that they would put in cameras that were extremely bright. I mean, when these
I remember.
You would blink and see this blue dot in front of your face for an hour.
I remember them.
That's how intense these lights were that were shining through the tent, through the canvas. And I wake up and I'm confused. I'm like, where am I? Oh, yeah, we're camping. And I see these lights, and I'm thinking, well, maybe these are the overhead lights of a park ranger's truck. That must be it. They're here to kick us out or something. And then I heard this droning noise, like a piece of big machinery. If you've ever stood next to a piece of big industrial machinery, they make a low noise that's more powerful than it is loud. You can feel it in your chest.
I had that.
That's what this was.
A couple of months ago, there was my whole bedroom lit up, and you could see this. For some reason, I didn't get out of bed. And normally, any noise outside, I'll get out of bed. But this tremendous roaring noise. It was so loud, and I live in the middle of the countryside.
What was it? Did you ever determine what it was?
Oh, but it was so... I've never heard anything so loud in all my life. I tell you, it was like a Boeing jumbo jet sitting there, lifting off from my garden. That's what it sounded like. It was so loud.
That's crazy. Yeah, well, that's what this was like.
Well, I didn't get out. I didn't get up. Yeah, go on.
Yeah. Well, my thought was... because, again, I'm still confused. I'm still in a daze, and I'm thinking, well, this park ranger must be running a generator in the back of his truck, and that must be the source of the noise. And then I'm thinking, that doesn't make any sense. And in one of these flashes of white light, I look down at my feet, and my boots, my combat boots, are unlaced 3/4 of the way down. And I know I didn't do that. And I thought, well, what the heck? And I pulled off one of my boots, and my socks are on sideways. And I would never do that. In the military, one of the things they teach you is you got to take care of your feet. I would never put my socks on sideways. I'd never untie my boots 3/4 of the way down. So I don't know. So I put my boots on properly, and I realized that I hurt, that I'm in a lot of pain. And I turned my attention to my left, and here's Toby, who's sitting on he's on his knees, and he's got the flap of the tent pulled back, and he's staring out at the meadow. And Toby was African American, and he had been crying, and I could see against his dark skin the tracks would light up from these flashes of light, because I guess the water and the saline, but they lit up, and I could see the man had been crying. And for the first time, I felt fear. That scared me, because I could not imagine what would move this man to cry. Because I'd worked with him a long time. We knew one another. We'd been in some, kind of dangerous situations. He was always a level-headed guy. And I'm like, Toby, man, what is it? Is it park rangers? What's out there? And he shushes me, be quiet. And I'm confused. I don't know what's going on. And I get to my knees, and I look out onto the meadow, and I see what I first thought were children. And maybe a dozen, maybe 15. And they're all kind of paired up in 2s and 3s, and they're all just wandering around this meadow. And I'm confused. And I asked Toby, I said, Toby, what are these kids doing out here in the middle of the night, in the middle of nowhere? And that's when he said, Terry, man, those ain't no little kids. They're not human beings. Look at them, Terry. And I did.
Bloody hell.
Yeah. And he was right. They were not human beings. They had disproportionately large heads, spindly bodies. They were short, maybe 3.5 foot tall, 3.5 foot tall, and they all walked with this really distinctive gait. It was like their knees could move backward during the course of them taking a step. It was odd. It was just they walked in an odd pace, odd gait. And they didn't seem to be looking at the ground or looking for anything. They were looking all around the forest, just kind of looking around, almost like if they were tourists or something, you know? And we watched this for a minute or two, and we were so scared. All we can think of is, my God, I hope they don't come over here, you know? And
by your boats, they'd been over there.
Oh, yeah. Well,
yeah.
And then from the bottom of this craft, that's the second thing I should mention. This thing is no longer 3,000 feet above us. It has descended in the night, and it's now just 30 feet over us. So now it's right over our heads.
Oh, God.
And there came a light. Again, this is a column of white light, about maybe 25, 30 feet in diameter, and it came right from dead center of the triangle where the other lights came from earlier in the evening. And there's this visible column of light on the floor of the meadow. And these little guys would wander into this light in twos and threes, and once they were in the light, they would just evaporate. Very similar to the old Star Trek thing. And I've never been a science fiction fan. I want that on the record. But just like in the old Star Trek thing where they had the transponders and the people would kind of, disintegrate into particles and then be gone.
As a Trekkie, I have to say,
Scotty.
transporters.
Yes. That's what this was like. These guys would just evaporate, and they were gone. And when the last two got into the light and they evaporated, they were gone, then this light shuts off. And then on the apex, the 3 points of the triangle, the lights changed from multicolored to just white. And that droning noise that we'd heard stopped. And it was dead quiet again. And we watched while this thing took off. And it didn't take off like a rocket ship. I mean, it just lifted off like a hot air balloon. And it rose up into the sky and did about a 3/4 turn and kept going up. And the higher it got, the faster it went. And we watched it go from 3 points of light to a single point of light, and then it was gone. And still no noise. And this sounds odd, but all we had over our heads was this canvas, but I felt like this canvas tent, flimsy as it was, at least gave us cover. It wasn't, we were hidden. And the idea of walking out of that tent and running to our car, my car, terrified me. And, to this day, I have a fear of walking out in the open. I mean, if I'd have to cut across an open field to get somewhere, I'd rather walk a mile around it than cut across an open field, especially by myself. I won't do it.
It's almost giving you a sense of agoraphobia.
Yes, it has. There were a couple odd things from this encounter that I walked away with, such as, 40 years of nightmares, recalling incidents. That's part of the reason I wanted to call it Incident at Devil's Den, because my memory, I don't have a clear linear memory of what happened to us inside that ship. I wish I did. And maybe someday I'll go through a hypnotic regression and find out. I talked with Kathleen Marden about that last Wednesday. And
that was going to be my question, is if you ever had conducted a hypnotic regression.
Yep, I never have. I've talked to two people, Kathleen Marden and Yvonne Smith, both about it. And I'm going to have that done. I think I'm ready to have that done. I'm fearful of that on a lot of levels. But Yvonne reassures me that if I do that, I'll find it more reaffirming, reassuring. It'll be some trauma going through it, but on the other side, it will be better. So
you'll get a closure. But Toby, did you keep in touch with him? Did he have any boots on backwards or anything, or did he have any implants?
Toby is an interesting case. We talked earlier about how we think these things can control our emotions, our intentions. Yeah. We were different people. I felt like when we got there, we were still kids, and we left there. We left there as adults. And to this day, I tend to measure events in my life pre-1977 and post-1977. I mean, it was literally the biggest event of my life. And I mean, I've had two wonderful children, and they're certainly their births rank way up there. But I'm sorry to say, this was the biggest event in my life. And Toby, something changed between Toby and I don't understand it. Didn't understand it then, don't understand it to this day. But here we are. We eventually ran to the car, we bolted, we got in the car, and we're headed back. And I said, Toby, in the dark, can you navigate me out of this place, without breaking an axle? And he'd always been the one with the sense of direction. I don't have a sense of direction, but he did. And he got us out of there and back on blacktop. And there was something different between us. I mean, I didn't want to talk to him anymore. Now normally 2 human beings go through this type of traumatic event. They get together and they want to debrief, and they want to reaffirm and validate for each other, this is what happened to us. But it wasn't that way. It was weird. It was, I had this feeling that I want nothing to do with this guy. And I don't understand that.
So you kind of drifted apart?
Well, what happened was this. We got back, and we were both seriously injured. Spent several nights in the hospital, but we were separated. The base commander, the hospital commander, and 2 guys in civilian clothes, casual civilian clothes, who I did not recognize, came into the hospital, and they told me, the hospital commander said, and he was very formal, and he said, Sergeant Lovelace, you're to have no contact with Sergeant Tobias in any way, shape, or form. That means verbally, by telephone. You're not to send him notes. You're not to give him anything. He's not to give you anything. If you run into him at the base exchange, you're to immediately turn around and walk in the opposite direction. You're not to try to attempt to make contact with him through third parties, and on and on and on. And he's like, do you understand, Sergeant? And I said, yes, sir. But I really didn't. But I felt I was in a weird place. I thought, that's just as well. But I really had felt obsessed to tell the guy goodbye. He got orders cut for Japan out of the blue and was gone in a matter of weeks. So we were both so ill that we were off work 30 days. And despite this no contact order, my wife and I were driving home from the base exchange where we got some groceries. And Toby and I both lived on base housing just about 3 blocks from one another. And I begged my wife, I said, please stop by. I just want to run in and tell Toby goodbye. And she's like, Terry, you've been ordered not to do this. And I'm like, I know, but, I just owe it to the guy to tell him goodbye. And so she was hesitant, but she stopped. And I ran up the walkway, and they were filling boxes. They were preparing for their move. And I walked through the front door without knocking, the same way I'd walked through it 100 times before. And I met his wife, and she was carrying a lamp, and she just glared at me and gave me a hard look, which I didn't expect. And she said, you're not supposed to be here. And I said, I know, I just want to say goodbye to Toby. Well, Toby was in the bedroom and must have heard our exchange, because he walks around the corner and comes down the hallway, and he is a train wreck. Now, I worked with this guy for almost 3 years, and we were friends. We played cards. We barbecued. Our wives were friends. I knew this guy well, and he was a mess. I mean, he was always meticulous about his personal appearance, and he was disheveled. His hair was all in different directions. He wore a dirty T-shirt. He had on no shoes or socks, dirty jeans. Yeah, he might have been dirty from getting packing and doing the moving stuff, but it just seemed so out of character to him.
Yeah.
And he walked up to me, and he was about 6 inches. I'm 6 foot even. He was probably 5'6" or 7. And he walks up to me, and I wanted to embrace the guy. I thought that would be appropriate, but I didn't. And I held out my hand, and we finally connected and made this awkward handshake. And I said, I heard you're going to Japan. I heard you got orders, PCS, and you're going to be leaving. And he said, yeah, we're going to Japan. And I'm looking down at him, and his eyes are bloodshot, and he smells like vodka. Now, this is a guy that during a barbecue might drink a can of beer, maybe a can and a half, but he was never a drinker. And he reeks of vodka. And he's looking up at me, and he's like pleading. He says, it happened, didn't it, Terry? It really did happen, didn't it? And I just felt stunned, and I said, yes, my brother, it all happened. You're not losing your mind. It happened to us. And he's like, why? And I'm like, man, I don't have a clue. I don't know why, but it did. And I said, I just wanted to wish you luck. And I turned around, and I walked out of the house and ran back to the car, and we were gone. And that's the last time I saw him. I did find out, because he and his wife and my wife were friends. She was contacted in the early 80s and said that she and Toby had divorced, and that's when we found out that he was discharged from the Air Force prematurely, and he was back living in Flint. Well, I had his dad's phone number in Flint, and I called him and talked to his dad, and I said, I really want to talk to Toby. And his dad said, well, Toby's still here, but he's not doing so good. And I said, well, and he knew who I was. And I said, well, will you please give him this number and have him call me? And he never did. And a few years later, I called the number again, and it was disconnected. Oh. But the interesting part of the story is that a few years after that, when I'm practicing law, I'm working on a case involving the FBI. And I got to know this special agent pretty good, decent guy, and we became kind of friends. And on Friday nights, a lot of times we'd have a beer and kind of go over stuff and, gossip about people at work, that kind of thing. And I asked him one night, I said, you know what, I've been trying to find a friend I was in the Air Force with. Do you think you could help me find him? And he's like, sure, piece of cake. He said, I can find anybody as long as they're not a fugitive. And I'm like, yeah, I don't think this guy's that. He says, well, just write down every bit of information you can think about. Prior addresses, names, relatives, every bit of information you can think of. Put it on a piece of paper, bring it to me, and I'll see what I can do. So I did. And I gave him all this information. And about 3 weeks later, he says, it was a Thursday night. He says, tomorrow night, meet me at the bar. We'll have a beer. And he says, I got some news for you. And I said, okay. And is it concerning Toby? He says, well, just meet me down here. I'll tell you all about it. So I did. I met him down at the bar. And he says to me, I'm sorry to tell you this, but your friend's dead. And I said, he's dead? What do you mean he's dead? He's a relatively young man. And he says, I'm sorry, Terry, it was an automobile accident outside of Flint. He was struck by an oncoming car, not his fault. He wasn't even driving, but he's deceased. And I just felt stunned. And he says, Terry, I'm sorry, but, stuff like this happens. And I kind of decided, well, I got no choice but to live with it. So when I wrote my book in 2017, I thought, I'm going to find his obit, because I'd never read his obituary. And I got online, and I did some research, and I found his obituary. He died September 4th, 2007. The FBI agent lied to me. He lied to me. I don't either that or he was just lazy and blew it off and said, "Oh yeah, but I can't see him doing that." I think he intentionally misled me. Now I don't know if my file was marked for some reason, or I don't know, because we both had an extensive interrogation by the OSI, the Air Force Office of Special Investigation, and I wonder to this day if it's something to do with that.
He obviously wasn't taking it as well as you. Maybe they felt that he was a threat.
It could be. I just don't know. I just feel terrible that we had all this time wasted. But
did you find out how he died in his obituary?
He died in 2007. He was relatively young.
Was it an automobile accident then, or was it something else?
Well, the obituary doesn't say.
Oh.
It just says that he passed. The only research that I could find is I found online the book that people sign when they attend the funeral. You're asked to sign a book, and the book had 3 signatures. One was the funeral director, and the other 2 were names I didn't recognize. And that's it. That's it.
Jeez.
So that's
fishy, isn't it? That's very fishy.
It's either fishy or it's heartbreaking. It's one or the other.
Well, it's both.
Yeah.
Him not taking it so well, isolating himself from everybody else and everything. He lost his wife. He lost his family. Having a breakdown. I know people who have been in similar situations who kind of lose everything when they go through a traumatic event. One thing that really strikes me, though, is going a few steps back here, when you guys were leaving the campsite, and then that sudden feeling of you guys didn't want to talk, you didn't want anything to do with him. My gut's telling me that was some kind of hypnotic suggestion. In fact, maybe a lot of what Toby was going through was due to some kind of hypnotic suggestion. Not exactly memories, because you guys don't have any real memories of what happened during that time other than what you said. But there is obviously either he remembered more or went through something so much more traumatic that he remembered, or it's something to do with suggestions to keep you two apart, to keep you from talking.
You know what? I think it's a combination of some type of mind control, and it was definitely the fact that he was hurt worse than I was. Whatever they did to me, they gave him a double dose, because he was really hurting.
Now, define hurt. What did you mean? When you guys had to spend in the hospital, what were you talking about? Like burns, radiation burns, or things like that?
Yeah, as soon as we left, all I wanted was something to drink. I mean, my initial flight response was I just wanted to put distance between us and this thing, or where this thing was. I wanted out of Devil's Den. But the second overriding feeling was thirst. I had never been so thirsty in all my life. I remember I even asked Toby, I said, man, turn on a flashlight, look around the car, see if you can find a can of soda or something in this car. Anything you can find that won't poison me, I'll drink. And he did, and he looked around, and he says, yeah, I'm the same way, but I don't find anything, man. And I was in my old 66 Chevrolet, and it had a big bench seat in the front. And Toby was kind of a small guy anyway, and he was kind of curled up into a ball. And I don't think he would have been able to drive a car. And we stopped for gas, and I got out and I ran to the bathroom, and it was a dirty station, just a dirty old gas station, and I put my hands underneath this faucet, cupped my hands, and I just drank and drank and drank as much as I could hold, and still didn't feel satisfied. And I hurt all over, and I looked in the mirror, and my face is just beet red. I had what was like the worst sunburn I'd ever experienced, without blistering. I had no blisters anywhere. But what was curious is I was burned on the soles of my feet. I was burned under my arms. I mean, I was burned everywhere. I mean, I would have had to been, like a chicken on a rotisserie in the sun, and that didn't happen. I never took off my shirt, not even when I went to bed. I wore a cap most of the time during the day, and we were in shade. We weren't out, sunbathing. That wasn't the object of the exercise. So I don't know where we got, but this burn left us severely dehydrated. That was our admission diagnosis to the hospital, was acute dehydration, secondary to sunburn. And then the curious thing Toby and I both had was what the doctors called them flash burns. And it's the same thing that a welder would get if he didn't use the mask, with the tinted glass, and he looked straight at the end of the blowtorch.
Right.
And what it is it's a sunburn to the cornea of the eye, basically.
Right.
And it's very, very painful. I mean, it feels like you have sand in your eyes. And we both had that. And, I was really angry right after this happened. And but I've kind of mellowed over time. I mean, I don't think that they intended to burn us. I really don't. I think it was just collateral damage.
Well, I was going to ask you that. Did you go through all the emotions afterwards? Did you get upset? Did you say you were angry? Did you go through all the series of emotions afterwards?
I sure did. I went through the whole gamut. I mean, it was a hard adjustment to get through. And I was tested twice because of the nightmares and the. 1987, we were Christmas shopping, and we were in a mall, and we walked around the corner, and there was this women's clothing store, and it had these naked, bald mannequins in the window, and they were from the waist up, and they had arms, and I glanced to my right as we're walking by, and I saw them, and I had a panic attack. And I don't recall ever having a panic attack in my life before. And I can tell you, it's no fun.
Yeah.
And to this day, I can't look at naked storefront mannequins. They wig me out for some reason. I sleep. I have to have the blinds closed. The door has to be open. And I usually listen to orchestral music or some type of meditative app with headphones, so I don't have to hear ambient noises, random noises in the house. Because if I do, then I got to get out of bed. I got to go through this ritual of using my flashlight and a handgun and check the entire house and the closets and check the alarm and and once I do all that, then I can usually go back to sleep. But yeah, that's still to this day. If I hear a noise, I've got to get up and go through that ritual. So the point of this was that I was tested for PTSD. My wife, after this incident at the mall around Christmas time in 1987, she suggested I see a therapist. And we had great insurance, so I did. And she gave me a called the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Exam, or the MMPI. And it's a standardized test that's been around for 80 years.
Yeah.
And it's a pretty valid measure of things, as long as you answer honestly. And I did. And there's a lie scale built in, believe it or not, that can tell if you're answering honestly. And I was diagnosed with PTSD. And she left the diagnosis as PTSD etiology unknown. So... And then I was retested by the VA, by a therapist at the VA in 1994, and came back with the exact same diagnosis. So, something traumatic happened to us. Yeah.
You've got a chapter in your book called Betty the Lady, MIB, Men in Black.
Mm-hmm. That's the last chapter of the book. That is the chapter that is, I almost left it out of the book. And my friend, who's an editor, told me, he says, man, this is the whole point of everything. This is what gives your story. He says, yeah, a lot of people won't believe it, but this is the truth, and you should tell it. And I agree with him, and I did. Mm-hmm. And what happened was, in October of 2017, about the third week, and I don't remember the day, about the third week in October 2017, I woke up from a sound sleep sitting in my living room in my favorite chair, and I opened my eyes and I'm surprised. I mean, I've never sleepwalked in my life. And I'm thinking, how did I get here? And I immediately glanced to my left and I looked at the alarm. The alarm is set. The cat's in the corner, stretching, just not interested. And then seated directly across from me is what I first took to be a petite Asian woman. And
okay.
I did not feel, my reaction again was inappropriate. Instead of screaming or grabbing a gun, I felt that calm, that sense of calm wash over me again. And I wasn't anxious at all. I was curious. And I had the thought, what are you doing in my living room? And I heard her in my head, as clear as a bell, say, it's good to see you again, Terry. And she looks familiar. And my next thought was, is this about the thing in my legs? And then I realized we're communicating telepathically.
Yeah.
And that was, you know what, that was actually frightening. And I'll tell you why. I mean, you've heard of, if you had a group of fourth graders in front of you and you told them, class, don't think of elephants for the next 5 minutes. Well, these kids are going to be able to think of nothing but elephants, right?
That's right.
So I'm sitting there and we're kind of conversing. She says it's about this thing in my leg, that they've been putting them in people for many generations, 3 generations now. And I asked her, telepathically, what's the purpose? And she dodged the question and says, well, it serves many purposes.
Sorry, when she said they've been putting them in their legs for many years or whatever now. Did she say we have been putting them in? Did she use the word we?
No, I don't think so. I don't think so. I think she said they've been putting them in.
Yeah.
And I'll explain that in a second. But the fear that I had was, and there's a reason that human beings can't communicate telepathically, and because we don't have the discipline to do it. Because I thought, what if I think something inappropriate, or what if I think of something that offends her, and make her angry at me, And of course, once I had that thought, what immediately followed was every kind of inappropriate thought you could imagine. And she looks at me, and I heard she was almost a maternal type of entity to me. I felt this maternal affection for her. And she looked at me almost embarrassed, and she says, Terry, you can keep some of your thoughts to yourself if you just try. Now, I don't know if she said that, just to put me at ease or if it's true. But it did put me at ease, and I was able to focus a little better. And we went on. And she told me a couple of things, and they're all in the back of my book. And she told me, she told me she was a hybrid. And she told me that these things that are in my legs were put there by, she used the word host, H-O-S-T.
Yeah.
And I thought it was a curious word. She said they were put in your body by my host. And this was October 2017. She said, if you continue to talk about this, write a book and speak about it, they'll come and they'll take these items. My host will come in the night, they won't hurt you, but they'll take these items out of your leg.
Which they did.
Devices, which they did 3 weeks later.
Mm.
And she referred to them as devices. And
where did you get the name Betty from?
I got the name Betty because of the wig that she wore. She wore this sounds funny, but she wore a jet black wig, and her head, the backside of her head, is so bulbous, is so large. This wig was obviously made for a human being.
Yeah.
And it sat on her head kind of askew, kind of sideways. And there was a Hanna-Barbera cartoon series called The Flintstones in 1960.
Right, yeah. She looked like Betty Rubble.
Looked like Betty Rubble. But you know what's crazy is I recognized her at some point when she took off her glasses and I looked at her face. I recognized her as the woman that I called Sue when they used to take me when I was a kid. And I think that's why I had this maternal feeling for her. And she and no fear. And she hadn't aged a day. She looked just like last time I saw her. And
she was solid. She was
absolutely solid. This was not this was as solid as any living entity. And we sat across and had a conversation, and then suddenly she's just gone, and I'm back asleep.
Huh.
So, and I woke up the next morning, and I wrote down everything that I could remember.
Where did you wake up? In your chair or in your bed?
I woke up in the bed, but I think I may have dozed off in the chair because I didn't actually see her leave. So I'm not clear on that point. Had I been there, I should have seen her leave somehow, pop out of existence or something. But I didn't see that. I thought about my wife was asleep just down the hall from me. I thought about screaming for her, and I thought, you know what, they got that covered too. She'll never hear me.
No.
And I didn't even try.
Wow. The cat didn't react.
Cat, who would normally be inquisitive, was just no, like nothing's going on. And she was dressed in black, and she had on the sleeves of her blouse were disproportionately long, and I knew that they were covering these four long gray fingers. And she had on black slacks and like black nursing shoes, sturdy black nursing shoes with a very high heel to give her some height.
Yeah.
And, I think if this woman had walked the downtown streets of Dallas, she'd have hardly drawn a second look. Maybe as she took the wig off and wore a hat, she wouldn't even draw a second look. But that was my experience with her.
Huh. Now, we've only got about 7 minutes left in the program, so I've definitely got a couple of questions in regards to things. First of all, when the military told you to cut off all contact with Toby, you weren't ever supposed to see him again. Was there any fallout from you going back and saying goodbye? Did they ever get wind of that?
They did. I left this out for sake of brevity, but when I left Toby's house, again, my wife was driving the car. It was her car, her Carmen Ghia, so she was driving. And as soon as I walked out the front door, there was a blue security police vehicle parked right in back of us. And there was a truck parked in front of us. And these guys knew we were wedged in. And I was scared to death they were going to arrest us. And I got in the car, shut the door, and my wife was crying and hysterical. And I said, calm down. Look, baby, if they were going to arrest us, we'd be in handcuffs. Just relax and just, you've parked in downtown St. Louis. You know how to parallel park. You know how to get out of this. Just take your time and squeeze out of here. And it took her a while, but she did. And she drove home, and we got home, and they followed us home. I pulled into my driveway. They parked in front of my house. Now, they had every right to. I was living on base. I was on the base, living in base housing. And I had a hands full of groceries, and I went up to my front door, turned the key, and I could hear my phone ringing, my wall phone ringing inside the house. And I walked in, dropped the groceries, and I picked up the phone, and it was one of these OSI agents that had interviewed me while I was in the hospital. I didn't have time to cover that. There were 2 agents that came and interviewed me while I was in the hospital and interrogated me pretty harshly. And I recognized the guy's voice because he had this odd Louisiana or Mississippi kind of accent, kind of like Calvin Parker, the guy that, talk sideways kind of thing. And he said, "Well, you just couldn't do it, could you, son? You just had to go and violate my order." And he says, "I got to tell you, nothing me off more than an enlisted man disobeying my order." And he said, "Watch yourself, Lovelace, because we're watching you." And I hung up, and I just, man, I deserve an awful lot of attention for some reason. And the wind-up from that was these guys found out that I was an amateur photographer. I think they, honest to God, thought that I had a 36 exposure roll of film with pictures of this thing.
It was a pity you didn't.
I wish I had. But when I was in the hospital, this major who identified himself, he was with a captain. They were both OSI. They were in blue business suits, and they did kind of a intimidation interrogation kind of thing. And when the captain left the room, it was just me and the major in the room, and he got down next to my ear. And he said this, he said, "Son, I know, and you 2 knuckleheads stumbled onto something out there, and I think you know what I mean." Now, we never told anyone we saw a UFO. We told them that we got tired, we went to bed, weren't feeling well, woke up sick as dogs. So that's kind of the truth. And anyway, he looks at me and he says, "I think you know what I mean." And I didn't answer him. And he says, "Oh, I know you know what I mean. And all I want to know is, where's your camera? Where's your film?"
I was going to say, did they search your belongings? They obviously knew what you stumbled on by your injuries.
Oh, they searched my house.
They've seen it before.
They searched my house. I had signed a consent waiver. They had me sign 6 forms. And because of the burns to my eyes, I could hardly read. And they kept the lights off in the hospital room. And this major kicks on the overhead lights. And anyway, I signed a consent search, and security police went to my home and searched my home. And they seized a roll of undeveloped film. They seized my wife's camera that had, birthday party pictures on it. And the fact was, the thought to take a picture of this thing never crossed my mind. I actually left my camera at home, which is an odd thing to do. But, Toby had a camera. He had it in his backpack right by him. But the thought of taking a photograph of this thing did not cross our minds. And I just have trouble wrapping my head around that.
Again, some type of subliminal, implant, some type of hypnotic suggestion.
Yeah, had to be, because that's totally out of character. How people that are into photography, you know how they are. They're always taking pictures of everything. And
always got a camera on them.
Yeah,
that's me. I'm always taking pictures.
But
did you think that maybe your car could have been bugged when they found out that you'd been to Toby's? Tracker on it.
I never thought about that. That.
Oh, I don't miss a trick, me.
My house was probably bugged too. They searched my car. They kept my car for 2 days.
Jeez.
And when they gave it back to us, like it had been detailed. It had been vacuumed and washed. It wasn't waxed, but it was clean.
Yeah.
Wow.
What I think happened was, when we left, we didn't bother to put that chain back up across the road. And I think the park rangers found our little campsite, and Toby's address was in this backpack that he had. And I think the Rangers found that. They called the base and say, hey, 2 of your airmen are down here, and it looks like they're planning on coming back. They got a little campsite set up. But I'm guessing. That's speculation.
That could be, but they obviously, like I said, your injuries would have given a lot away, especially if they'd seen it before. Well, those type of injuries.
Unfortunately, would you believe we've actually run out of time here? But Terry, your story is fascinating, and definitely would have a lot more questions to ask you. But you do have your book, Incident at Devil's Den, and where can people find that? Where can they buy your book, and how can they get in touch with you?
Yes, they can buy my book on Amazon. It's in the form of a paperback that has photographs of my x-rays, a drawing that I made of the ship, and some relevant photographs in the paperback. There's also a Kindle version, and I also recorded an audiobook that I did in my own words, and that seems to be very popular. I also have, if you don't want to go to Amazon, I also have a website, just terrylovelace.com. And I have a Facebook page, just Incident at Devil's Den. I have a page under the name of the book, Incident at Devil's Den. And if you want to email me, you can email me at lovelace.landpope, LANDPOPE, @gmail.com. And if you email me, I promise I'll read your email in return with an answer.
Great. Well, Terry, again, thank you so much for coming on the show. Your story is very fascinating. I know that there's a lot more that could be uncovered, and I definitely would be interested if you do decide to go through with your hypnotic regression, maybe have you back and we can discuss that plus some of the other things that I know that have happened to you since this time.
I promise I will.
Okay. Well, again, thank you. And thank you to everyone for listening to another edition of Paranormal UK Radio. And we'll be back next week with another new episode. Everyone who's out under quarantine, just stay safe. And we will catch you next week.
Okay. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks, Irene. Thanks, Mark.
Bye.